Hi everyone, I'm Jackie, and today in this video I'll cover the June 2025 SAT exam reading and English predictions. So, per usual, let's jump in. Okay, so starting off with standard English conventions, the questions I believe will appear on the exam. Okay, so here, the distant exoplanet identified as Gliese 581g may lie within its star's habitable zone, raising the possibility of liquid water. Over time, scientists may uncover whether Gliese 581g could sustain life based on conditions. Then I can see clearly looking at the answer choices. Most of them contain apostrophes, so I'm definitely dealing with apostrophe testing. So the first one, based on researchers' analysis of the planet's conditions. Okay, well, first of all, I definitely need an apostrophe S here because it's talking about the conditions of the planet. So if any of you are international students and have a Latin-based language or you take Spanish class, an easy way to test this, if you're ever confused, check to see if you can write, if it makes sense to say conditions of the planets. It does, right? So since it does make sense, I for sure need that apostrophe S here. And the same is true with the analysis happening. So here, when I say the analysis of the researcher, analysis of researcher or researchers. Analysis of researchers. And logically, there's going to be more than one researcher. So for that reason, it would have to be option D, which is the plural apostrophe. When you have multiple researchers doing an analysis, I need to put the apostrophe at the S, after the S. And therefore, I know for sure that it is option D. So be confident and comfortable with apostrophes would be my prediction for June SAT. Next up, dashes. So again, doing just a quick scan of the sentence, I see that there's a dash here. No other dash appears in the sentence. And it's not a complete sentence that happens before. So I definitely know for sure I'm going to want an answer with a dash in it. This would be used for non-essential or extra information. So I'm just going to go ahead and discard option A and C. And then looking at this, examining Panthera onca, or jaguars as they're more commonly called. So the one that would make most sense would be option B. Why? Because basically this would be that I'm just eliminating everything here and the sentence and also here. And the sentence would read, examining Panthera onca, a 2022 research team led by Dr. Sofia Mendez concluded that these large cats travel across greater distances than previously thought when establishing their territory in South American rainforest. If I just did here, the only thing that gets eliminated in option D would be this. So it would read, examining Panthera onca, as they're more commonly called, and that doesn't make sense, right? So for that reason, I know for sure it will be option B. So be confident and comfortable with that. Next up, looks like a boundary question, but here, pay special attention because note, and you've probably seen me say before, scan the answer choices. And oftentimes it is true that a semicolon and a period, they are the same, which means usually I can eliminate them if they were being used to separate two independent clauses. However, looking as I always do, scanning the sentence, I notice a big red flag. Oh my goodness, a semicolon and You only see the semicolon and being used when it's being used for a super list, or it could also be called a complex series. You may have learned it as either one. Doesn't matter, it's the same thing. And for that reason alone, I know that I'm separating multiple items in a list and that I need to have a semicolon to separate those items in a list. So it's going to be A. But to emphasize why it's A, let's take a look. So here you can see it says the intensity of volcanic lighting during eruptions is influenced by several factors. And the dash here, it's not serving like it previously did as extra information. It's serving to set off a list of items. So it's serving, in this case, the dash is actually equivalent to the colon. Okay, so, and you can see it says chiefly the amount and composition of the particles, their ash particles in the plume, with fiber ash producing more frequent electrical discharges. And then environmental conditions such as humidity and wind speed. So notice that we always use the super list when we have multiple items in the list that contain commas. So within item list 2, I have the comma here, and you can also see there's an additional comma in the third item in the list. So main takeaway or epic tip, whenever you see the semicolon and, that is a big flag for you to know that it's the super list being tested and that likely you'll need to pair with semicolon. Next up, this is a really good one because, well, let's go over it and I'll explain why. So this one, despite variations in diet, habitat, and behavior, the many bird species that migrate along the Pacific flyway share one characteristic, dependent on seasonal changes in temperature and food availability. For instance, the western sandpiper adjusts its migratory timing based on shifting coastal insect populations. And this says, which of the following completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So first, just reading them, all of them are, that could be okay. All of them is, that would have to be are, so I can eliminate option B. Each of them is, that's okay. And each of them are, that is incorrect. Why? Because remember, each is an indefinite singular pronoun and it agrees with each. So I'm going to be between A and C. So then reading here, it says they share one characteristic, each of them on seasonal changes in temperature and food availability. So the reason why I say it's a good one is because a lot of students will say it's A, all of them are, because that's the one that sounds good. And that's how we speak when we speak in English. But that's incorrect because here, they share one singular characteristic, and therefore I need to choose the singular option. Each of them is dependent on seasonal changes. So it's connecting to the singular characteristic. Okay, so don't ever choose a choice because it sounds good. There's always a grammatical reason why. And if you do get like each of them on the SAT, I mean, SAT especially loves this construction, the each of or any of, where they test the indefinite singular pronoun. So I would be most inclined to choose that answer choice if I couldn't find what it was referring to in the sentence. Okay, amazing. And continuing our journey into my last prediction. And of course, per usual, if you want even more predictions, always check out my other exam prediction videos. See playlist in the comments because it's good to watch all of them in my experience and opinion and the experience of my students. Okay, so final one. This one, I always scan the answers, check what I'm dealing with, definitely looking at verbs here. And this is the classic SAT, the 3 versus 1 split. What does that mean? That this is plural, singular, plural, plural. So when this happens, when there's 3 options that are plural, 1 singular, I know for sure it's already B. And I can answer that question in like 10 seconds on the exam. So that's amazing. However, because we want to be thorough for your SAT preparation, let's check out what the subject actually is. So here, the introduction of, so here we have x of y, just like you saw in the previous question, each of them, that's x of y construction. The introduction of a new postal code system in South Korea to improve mail delivery was, oh, it's referring to introduction, which is singular, which goes with was. So basically, none of this even matters. Just a bunch of extra fluff, SAT inserts to confuse you. Next up on the agenda, must know topics, expression of ideas. And these are all the domains that appear on your score report if you're not familiar with doing a Blue Book exam or if you haven't taken the official SAT. Okay, so first up, let's look at this one. In philosophical debates about consciousness, the field is divided between functionalist and epiphenomenalist. Well, there are those who argue that the former define mental states entirely by their computational or behavioral function, and those who maintain that the latter regard consciousness as non-causal byproduct of physical processes. Philosopher Dr. Renegarshi aligns with neither perspective. Okay. So here, to me, it seems to be clarifying what the two debates of consciousness are, which are functionalist and epiphenomenalist. And just so you see that the former refers to the first I dimension, and the latter refers to epiphenomenalist. And the one that's being used for clarifying would be that is. So for further clarification, it's not adding information, it is not contrasting anything, and it's also not giving a similar perspective. So maybe that is will appear on June SAT. Who knows? Okay, so next up, when gazing at the intricate geometric carvings found in the Kawawa Pablo ruins, one's imagination might drift toward abstract symbols or even extraterrestrial codes. It's the site's original layout, aligned precisely with solar cycles, that eventually grounds the viewer in the carving's real purpose, a ceremonial agricultural calendar. Okay, so without seeing the answer choices, to me, this seems to be like leading to the conclusion of what we ultimately see, a ceremonial agricultural calendar. So consequently, no, because there isn't a cause and effect relationship happening. Alternatively, neither, because it's not giving me like one way and then an alternate way. C, ultimately, that one works because that would be leading to the conclusion. Like, ultimately, it's the site's original layout that leads us to understand the real purpose. And additionally, it's not adding anything. So therefore, it must be C. Another amazing, amazing one. Okay. And let's take a look at this one. And if you're not doing these, you should pause, try to do them on your own, and then press play. Okay, so next, paleoclimatologist Lara Simons has proposed that ice core data from Antarctica's Dome Fuji site reveals climate fluctuations on a cycle of nearly 500,000 years. The lengths of this cycle, twice as long as the more widely studied Milankovitch patterns, marks these glacial shifts as extreme outliers. Most known glacier cycles span closer to 100,000 years, with far less variation in global temperature. So to me, it seems to be saying that there is this new cycle that Lara Simons proposed, and that it's twice as long as the more widely studied Milankovitch patterns, but that even still, these are extreme outliers that she found the cycle of 500,000 years ago. And then she's emphasizing, or it emphasizes, what cycle is the most common, the most common cycle. So it's emphasizing to me. So I'm going to look for a choice that emphasizes. It's not contrasting. It's just, further stating that it's the glacial cycle. It's 100,000 years with relative variation in global temperature. Those are the ones that are not the outliers. So the only one that emphasizes is, oh my goodness, indeed. Nevertheless, it's contrast. It's not contrasting. It's not adding. And consequently, there's no cause and effect relationship happening. So I would be confident with all these ones. If you thought these were tricky or tough, these would be considered hard level for SAT. And, you know, you want to make sure you know them for the exam. Okay, continuing our journey into student notes, which is also part of expression of ideas. So this one, while researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. So here it says, which choice most effectively uses information in the given sentences to emphasize the relative sizes of the two capitals' populations? So if you've practiced a bunch of Blue Book questions, you've probably come across similar structured questions. And here, well, let's go through. So Togo's capital, Lomé, has 837,437 people, while Armenia's capital, Yerevan, has 1,088,300 residents. So, doing a quick scan, that does seem to be factually correct. It is comparing the capital's populations, but it's not comparing the relative or emphasizing the relative sizes of the two capitals' populations. So, if I want to compare the relative sizes, it's not just which city is larger in population, but how each city's population compares to the size of its own country. So I need a relative comparison, not a superficial / factual one. So not loving A, although I feel could be a good trap. So B, the capitals of Togo and Armenia, Lomé and Yerevan, have populations of 837,000 and 1,088,300 respectively. So that seems pretty much like option A when I see it. However, let me just see if it's twisting any information. Seems to be factually okay. But again, it's just not doing a comparison of emphasizing the relative sizes. So C, although Yerevan population is larger than Lone population, Yerevan represents a much larger portion of its country's total population. So you see how this extra step is actually putting an emphasis on the relative sizes. I like that. And D, comparing Togo and Armenian, 803,437 is 10.2% of Togo's population, and 1,088,300 is 36% of Armenia's. So this could also be a popular trap. However, this is talking about Togo and Armenia. This is two countries. I'm asked to compare the two capitals, and therefore C would be our winner. So careful with these ones. In this case, they didn't really do any contradiction of the facts in the student notes. However, you really had to focus on emphasize the relative sizes, not just, factual information from the notes. And then be careful because I'm not sure if many people would know that the capital of Togo is Lomé. So they like to use lesser known countries to also try to be confusing. Isn't it amazing? And hello if you are watching from Togo or Armenia. Okay, and next up, this one, while researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. So the student wants to compare the electronegativity of fluorine and cesium. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so option A, the electron-hungry cesium atom attracts electrons more strongly than the less reactive fluorine atom. Fluorine has a higher electronegativity than cesium, meaning it pulls electrons more strongly in bonds. Okay. So both of these compare. And C, both cesium and fluorine have electronegativity values that affect their bonding behavior. This doesn't compare, so I can eliminate C. And then a comparison of fluorine and cesium shows that differences in electronegativity affect it seems like they're doing a comparison, but it's very general and doesn't actually compare the electronegativity of fluorine and cesium. So in these cases, when you notice that there's a comparison being made and they both seem like they make okay comparisons, then you should go back and read the student notes to be extra careful. And remember, this is a relatively new thing of the SAT that you can no longer read just the question on every single student notes question. If you're between two of the answer choices, you want to make sure and go back to read those student notes. So I know what electronegativity is, a measure of atoms' ability to attract electrons in a chemical bond. Elements with high electronegativity attract electrons more strongly. And in formal terms, these elements are sometimes described as being more electron hungry. Fluorine has the highest electronegativity of all elements, and cesium has one of the lowest electronegativities. So here I can see the electron hungry cesium. Well, it would be atom attracts more strongly. That would actually be fluorine. Then the less reactive fluorine atom, this would be less reactive cesium atom. And therefore, it must be correct choice B. So main takeaway, just take student notes questions seriously, especially in each of the modules. It could be module 1 or module 2 where they throw these questions in. A lot of them, yes, you can just read the question and do elimination of the choices. But as you see here, if you narrow it down to 2, or like they both make decent comparisons without reading the notes, go back and read the notes because likely one of the choices is factually inaccurate. Oh my goodness, how amazing. Okay, next up on the docket, information and ideas domain. So just friendly reminder, information and ideas, these consist of logically complete text, support undermine questions, and inferences in general. So let's do a couple. So like many other insect pollinated plants on the Hawaiian island of Maui, the endangered Ojai shrub depends on native bee species for pollination. However, biologists observed that non-native flowering plants such as lantana and fountain grass are visited far more frequently by bees than Ojai and other native species. These non-native plants produce large numbers of brightly colored blooms that may attract pollinators more effectively. Believing that the abundance and attractiveness of non-native flowers may be drawing pollinators away from native species, the biologists conclude that myrrh. So which choice most logically completes the text? So, just looking at the structure of this passage, it starts off introducing the Ohio shrub and how it's dependent on native bee species for pollination. And then it goes with a classic contrast to introduce a conflict, which is that these non-native species, lantana and fountain grass, are drawing more bee visits. And that seems to be showing a shift, aka there's a problem emerging. Always take note of the transition words when you're doing these ones. And then it explains more what this imbalance is causing, that the non-native plants are basically more attractive to the bees, and that's why they go for them. And then we have to find their conclusion, the biologist conclusion. So what would they likely conclude? So non-native plants are pulling pollinators away. This would probably be hurting the native plants. So I'm looking for something that's going to, fill this gap in the logic. So let's see. Option A, the lantana and fountain grass should be planted widely across Maui to attract more pollinators to the region. But it seems that the problem is that the local Ojai plant is not getting enough pollination. So it doesn't make sense that they would want to put more of the non-native plants. So that seems pretty illogical to me. Option B, pollination rates for native species like the Oi shrub would likely improve if the density of non-native flowering plants were reduced. That seems pretty logical because that addresses the core of the problem that non-native plants are distracting the bees. And maybe a solution could be to reduce the non-native plants. I'm liking B, but let's check out the other ones. C, native bees are less important for pollination than butterflies, which visit a wider variety of plant species. Okay, well, they didn't talk about butterflies anywhere, so this is a classic introducing new information, eliminate. And then option D, non-native plants like latan and fountain grass produce more seeds than native Hawaiian plants such as ojai. Okay, like this might be true, but it's never mentioned anywhere in the passage, right? They never talk about uh like seed reproduction. So the focus was all about bee visits and pollination, and therefore I would say off topic. So therefore it must be B. Okay. But you see that when I read these ones, I read really carefully, but I also dissect the structure of the passage. Like sentence one introduces a plant, and then always take special note of the transition words. If they do use like however, nevertheless, it's likely showing some shift occurring in the passage that might help us to complete and make the logical connection to the passage. Okay, next let's look at a directly supports the researcher's assertion. So another one of information ideas. Okay, so here in a recent study, Dr. Aisha Raymond and her team investigated the evolution history of feather coloration in ancient birds. For decades, paleontologists believed that vibrant feather colors such as blues and greens evolved relatively recently within the last 15,000 years due to sexual selection in tropical bird species. Okay, so important that we find out what they believed for decades, that basically vibrant colors evolved recently. But then look, another shift. However, Raymond's team has challenged this timeline by identifying a mutation in genes SLC45A2, which regulates pigmentation in feathers. This mutation, associated with bright coloration in modern birds, was found to be widespread in a variety of bird lineages. So basically, well, before even looking at the answer choices, I'm thinking that bright coloration uh, evolved earlier. And if I want to support the researcher's assertion, I need to some evidence that would help to prove that the bright coloration did not involve recently, right? So that it's appeared maybe more than 15,000 years ago. Okay, so now that I kind of know what I'm looking for, let's go ahead into the answer choices and take a jump. So A, modern tropical birds with blue and green feathers commonly express variants of the SLC45A2 gene. Okay, but this would be a no. This supports the old theory that the birds today, have this gene. It doesn't show the mutation existed like before outside of the group. So this is a classic trap of just restating existing information without actually advancing the argument. Option B, the SLC45A2 gene regulates melanin production in both reptiles and birds, but its function varies between species. Okay, I mean, interesting, but why is it talking about reptiles and varying between different species? So it's just an irrelevant detail out of scope. C, a pigmentation related mutation in SLC 45A2 is present in 48,000-year-old fossilized feathers from an ancient Arctic bird species. Well, this seems to match pretty nicely with my prediction. I was looking for a timeline of over 15,000 years ago, so something that's much older, or AKA evolved earlier. Also, it's an Arctic bird species. It's not the tropical bird species mentioned. So that's showing that this gene existed earlier and also elsewhere. So it would be widespread in a variety of bird lineages. So I really like that one. Probably C, but let's see. Always double check everything. So option D. Most birds with vibrant plumage today live in warm climates and rely on visual displays to attract mates. Okay, so it's talking about tropical and sexual selection. But that's again, it's just relating to the old theory, not this new insight. So similar to option A. Wasn't that amazing? So you see, a lot of them have similar structures where they present some scientific facts and then they put a shift in the passage. So always take special note of that shift and try to predict what you think the answer could be and see if that more or less aligns with the answer choices. Maybe more often than not, it will, especially if you do a lot of practice. Okay, continuing our journey, let's do another one. Directly supports. So, permafrost thawing in Siberia has accelerated in recent decades due to rising global temperatures, potentially enabling increased methane, CH4, release through heightened activity of anaerobic microbes that decompose previously frozen organic matter. At the same time, vegetation growth may increase in thawed areas, enabling higher rates of methane absorption by certain moss species. Climate scientist Dr. Lena Makarov and her team conducted a simulation model that incorporated historical ground temperature, vegetation, and permafrost thickness data. Based on their findings, the team concluded that net methane emissions will likely rise if permafrost thaws begin earlier in the year than usual. Okay, so this one does seem to have a more of a cause and effect type of relationship. And that's something I want to take note of, which, here methane released through heightened activity of anaerobic microbes that decompose previously frozen organic matter. So basically, like on my note sheet, I'd be like, all right, there's thawing that's occurring. The microbes become active. And then consequently, there is more CH4 or methane release. And then it says at the same time, so instead of saying like, however, in the previous messages, it's showing a counter effect. And take note of what the counter effect is. Vegetation growth may increase in thawed areas, enabling higher rates of methane absorption by certain moss species. So this is like counter. We have that there's thawing. The thawing also leads to more moss. And then this also results to more methane absorption. So this is about absorption and this one is about release. Okay. And then talks about what Dr. Alina Makov and her team constructed that basically like modeling thaw, temperature, and vegetation. And she says that the earlier the thaw, the more net methane emission. Okay, so net methane emissions if the thaw begins earlier. Okay, so if I want to support Dr. Lena's conclusion, I need to strengthen something with the logic that earlier thaw has more methane released than absorbed. Okay, so how could we strengthen this logic? Well, some ideas that come to mind to me are maybe like boosting the release side, or maybe we're going to weaken the absorption side. Okay, so let's take a look at the answer choices. So A, early permafrost thawing reduces soil moisture levels, limiting the spread of methane absorbing moss species. Oh, this is actually supporting the conclusion, which I didn't write it above because I ran out of space, but basically earlier thaw equals more methane CH4 released. This could make sense because it explains why moss growth, and remember the moss growth is what is absorbing the methane, may be limited. So basically the absorbing side is getting weaker, which leads to a net increase in methane emissions. I'm liking A, but let's check out the other ones. B, areas with historically low vegetation growth tend to exhibit more stable permafrost conditions year round. Okay, so do we care what's happening with historical stability? No, like I want to be focused on when the thawing is occurring earlier. So this has nothing to do about the net methane rise. So not really, strengthening this cause and effect claim. C, anaerobic microbes are more active during periods when soil temperatures remain above freezing for extended durations. Okay, this is this seems kind of tempting because it's like, oh, they talk about anaerobic microbes, which was something that they did mention here in the passage. And this would support the idea that microbes release more methane when thawed, but this is already stated in the passage. Right? Like I just highlighted it. I'll put it here in green. Released through heightened activity of anaerobic microbes that decompose previously frozen organic matter. So this isn't adding any new support or explaining why earlier thaw is worse than later thaw. So it's just a redundant paraphrase. And that's not going to add further support or directly support the conclusion. It's just providing something we already know. And D, the depth of permafrost is greatest in regions with minimal seasonal temperature variation throughout the year. Okay, but this is talking about like seasonal variations throughout the year. That's not talking about the timing of the thaw. And this doesn't really affect the net methane emissions or early thaw release. So perhaps it's scientifically true, but it's not relevant to our claim. And therefore, I can definitely conclude that A was the one that made the most sense. Wasn't that so amazing? So if you thought this one was tough, feel free to go back, pause, redo it again, or like go through the breakdown of each sentence to understand what's happening with the thaws and the more net methane emissions. And then I would practice much more of these scientific type directly supports or even get familiar with undermine ones as well, because I'm sure you're going to see something similar on the June SAT. Again, not this exact passage, but definitely you're going to have a scientific one in some capacity. Okay, and final domain to discuss is craft and structure. And again, I know I get comments on where you can get more practice on these. You can look literally at all my previous playlist of these ones because I go through a lot of them. So let's look at craft and structure. So first, craft and structure, you want to really be confident with the vocabulary on the SAT. So these words, the ones that I'm putting here, they've just come up on many past SAT exams. So I would definitely want to know all the words that I go over here. So let's look at this one. Rejecting the rigid artistic expectation of mainstream literary journals, editor Maria Ellison cultivated publication that emphasized stylistic freedom and the thematic exploration. Her magazine, The Wild Quill, encouraged contributors to push boundaries and challenge conventions. Ellison's editorial approach, marked by humility and flexibility, contrasted sharply with that of her contemporaries, whose editorial preferences were notably more. Okay, so we see there's a contrast happening. So they were, pushing boundaries and challenging conventions. and it was marked with humility and flexibility. Really key here, flexibility. So this contrasts sharply of her contemporaries, which were notably like maybe less flexible or inflexible, maybe very rigid. So looking at the answer choices, like more proficient doesn't talk about, being more proficient in something. So that does make sense. Dogmatic. Oh, you know what dogmatic means? It means inflexible or rigid. So I think that one's going to be our winner. Um, so it is our winner. However, ambiguous, if something is ambiguous, it's like something that's unclear and unpretentious. Unpretentious would be somebody who is, or an article that is modest or humble. So that would be the opposite of what we want. We want dogmatic, rigid, or unyielding would be another good SAT synonym for dogmatic. Okay, so no dogmatic. It seems to come up a lot, and it is the total opposite of humility and flexibility, which is exactly what we were looking for. Okay, next up. As a graduate student in environmental science, Diego Morales contributed to a pivotal analysis challenging the prevailing assumption that early industrial pollution's impact on Arctic ecosystems was the team's investigation of ice core samples revealed unexpectedly high concentrations of heavy metals, indicating that contamination had reached even remote polar regions far earlier than previously believed. Okay, this is interesting because it's challenged with prevailing something that the impact was and what was that impact? That the team's investigation showed that it reached even more remote polar regions far earlier than previously believed. So it seems like in the past they were like, oh, it's not so bad, doesn't matter. But this research showed that that was wrong because it seems to have pretty important impact. So I want something that would be the opposite of that, opposite of important. So it seems like they didn't think it was very, mm, like it wasn't really affecting the Arctic ecosystem. So it wasn't very important. So looking at the answer choices, inevitable, like something that's bound to happen, that doesn't make sense. It was very satisfactory. There's nothing about like pleasure. Commonplace doesn't make sense. And negligible. Oh, you know what negligible means? Something that's unimportant. So like unimportant, like it was slight, minor, negligible. So negligible has come up a lot on SAT, not just in vocabulary and context type questions, but also just in the reading passages in general. You could see negligible. And a lot of people see negligible, and I think they think of a different meaning because they might think like negative or something along those lines. But negligible means unimportant. It's a great SAT word. You should know all of these words like inevitable, satisfactory, commonplace. Another synonym of commonplace that's common in SAT is banal, pronounced that way, banal. So just take note of all these ones. And I have one more for you. Okay, so for centuries, philosophers speculated about the existence of atoms, tiny indivisible units of matter that made up all substances. The atomic theory gained traction in the 19th century, but atoms themselves remained until advances in experimental chemistry and physics enabled scientists to observe their facts indirectly and eventually capture their images using electron microscopes. Okay, so it sounds to me that they were speculating about atoms, but they couldn't really prove that they existed. But eventually they did because they captured their images using electron uh, microscopes. So it seems like they remained something like speculated or hypothetical. So that's something I would want to fill in the blank. So I know all these words, but these are tough ones if you don't know them. So let's go over them so that you know them. So first, desultory. So desultory means like something that's disconnected, which doesn't really fit what we want. Like disconnected could also be someone who's like erratic, circling without aim, maybe somebody who rambles. It doesn't fit this context. Spurious, it means fake. Um, can also be like, counterfeit or something that's fraudulent. Um, so that also doesn't fit. Veritable, if you have a Latin language or you're studying Latin or you're studying Spanish, any romantic language, you might know very truth. So veritable just means like something that's real or genuine. So basically the opposite of spurious, which also doesn't fit. We're not looking for that. So ominous, it must be notional. And notional means something that's based on theory or something that's, theoretical, hypothetical, maybe imaginary, which is exactly what they're saying, that atoms were something that was notionable until they proved them to be true in the electron microscope. Oh my goodness, what an amazing passage. Okay, so other passages that fall under craft and structure. So whenever you see which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence as the whole, in this case, I didn't actually underline it, but it's the one that's in italics here because they're original, my own works and creations, no plagiarism. Okay, so this one. Read everything for these ones. So, the 1971 publication of John McWhorter's Losing the Race Self Sabotage in Black America marked him as a divisive figure within African American intellectual circles. Despite varied perspectives among these thinkers, McWhorter's critiques often put him at odds with most of them. He argued that certain strands of victimhood culture perpetuated underachievement and hindered progress. But he also openly challenged affirmative action policies, a stance that placed him in conflict with many moderate and conservative scholars who otherwise applauded his critiques of cultural defeatism. So, looking at this one when I'm assessing the question, we want to focus on the underlined sentence. So here starts with a amazing transition word, but so look for like but, however, nevertheless, etc. But it says like, but he also openly challenged affirmative action policies, a stance that placed him in conflict with many moderate and conservative scholars who otherwise applauded his critiques of cultural defeatism. So it's like even these people who agreed to some of his ideas, they still disagreed with him in this stance. So it's showing, a little bit deeper layer of division within him. And remember, he was already a divisive figure. So let's go through the answer choices. Option A, it outlines a step McWhorter believed was necessary for African American advancement. But this isn't saying what McWhorter thought should be done. It's just his reaction to his stance. It's not like, like it's not showing his proposed solutions. B, it suggests that McWhorter's positions were more widely accepted than often assumed. That's the opposite, because it's showing that, more widely accepted, like less widely accepted, because even his allies disagreed with his stance on affirmative action. So, it's showing how unpopular his view was. C, it highlights a reaction McWhorter's book provoked within the academic policy community. Okay, this is a popular incorrect choice because it's focusing on how certain scholars who agreed with him on some things still disagreed on this point, but we're not really focusing on like broad policy reaction. We want to really focus on how there's this like divergence from partial supporters. So if you went for C, if you pause the video and went for C, it is a trap. D, it helps illustrate how McWhorter's views diverged even from those who agreed with some of his arguments. That's exactly what I was explaining. And it seems to match what I was explaining, right? Like it's showing that even these moderate and conservative scholar who otherwise thought he was great, they rejected his personal stance on affirmative action. Isn't that amazing? But overall takeaway, whenever you have the like which of the line describes the function of an underlined sentence, just ask what is the sentence doing? Like, is it explaining a claim? Is it giving an example? Is it showing a contrast? Is it revealing some type of reaction? And eliminate answers that are confusing content with purpose. You always see me do this. I do process of elimination because I can always usually find something inherently wrong with all the answer choices. And it's not because I'm a 1600 square, which I am, but it's because a lot of practice gets you seeing the type of patterns that show up within the answer choices. And I can be like, wrong, wrong. And that's what you need to look for. Okay, so continuing our journey. Okay, so also under craft and structure is main purpose of the text. So let's look at this one. So, marine biologists from the University of Exeter conducted an experiment assessing the physiological responses of juvenile European sea bass, Dicentrarchus labrox, to increase concentrations of carbon dioxide, simulating conditions of ocean acidification. Fish were reared in tanks under current CO2 levels and under elevated CO2 levels projected for the year 2100. While survival rates remained high across all groups, fish in the high CO2 tanks exhibited altered otolith morphology, impaired olfactory mediated behavior, and dysregulated ion transport, symptoms indicative of acid base imbalance. These biomarkers were confirmed through both histological analysis and transcriptomic profiling. Okay, so like we know that there's some experiment that's taken place. Um, there's this increased CO2, and that leads to ocean acidification. And then we know what's happening with the control group, right, versus the experimental group. And then we got to the key finding, which shows that within the high CO2 tanks, they had all these problems. Basically, morphology, impaired olfactory, and dysregulated ion transport, which is showing this acid-base imbalance. So they confirm their observations using these specific tools. Why am I restating this? Because I want to find the main purpose of the passage. So I want to find something that summarizes basically what the study was testing and what was found. And, like, why did the author write this passage or do the scientific study? So, main purpose ones, let's do POE, process elimination. A, it describes an experiment that tests whether ocean acidification alters the pH balance of seawater across geographic regions. No, it's the studies about how the fish responded, not how the seawater was. B, it compares different environmental stressors that affect the behavior and physiology of juvenile fish. Well, different environmental stressors. They only focused on one stressor, which was a high CO2, aka ocean acidification. So there was no comparison of multiple stressors. I would call that an inaccurate scope expansion on the SAT. C, it presents evidence suggesting that increased CO2 levels disrupt key biological functions in marine organisms. Okay. This one also seems tempted, right? But it says in marine organisms. Well, I'm pretty sure they only mention one species, the juvenile European sea bass. So even though it might be pretty good up until here, doesn't matter. It's wrong at the end. So we can eliminate. And D must be D, but it discusses the findings of a study that evaluated the effects of future ocean acidification on a specific fish species. Yes, findings of a study. Yes, that happens. Evaluated the effects of future ocean acidification. Also, yes. And species of fish. Yes, the juvenile European sea bass. So must be option D. Species. So these ones, like read always the whole passage. Again, I would go back and read like what happened in the first sentence, the last sentence, see what's happening. If it's scientific passage like this, it's going to be like, is there an experiment? Is there an argument? Is there a description? Always eliminate choices that overgeneralize, like we saw here, marine organisms or like other species. And you always want to choose the one that matches 100% the, who, what, and why of the passage. Anything that's, even if it's like 3/4 true, doesn't matter. It has to be 100% true. And therefore, D is our winner. Amazing. Okay, so guys, wasn't this an amazing reading and writings predictions? I think so, or I hope so. So if you like this and you want more videos, I release a bunch. So like, rate, subscribe for more. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments, if there's any more question types you want to see, if you have any questions, doubts, etc. Be really confident with all the questions I went over here today, because I'm sure you'll see similar ones on the exam. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it's helpful and that it helps you get an 800 perfect score on your reading and writing section. Okay, so I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, guys.